everybody. So sorry, it's been a little bit since my last video, but thanks for tuning in today. I am excited to talk a little bit more about my ex Jehovah's Witness journey. And hopefully, some of the things I share today, some of the little tidbits, will help somebody out there. Before I get started, big shout out to Riley, aka Jexit, my fellow apostate YouTuber. It's his birthday today. Happy birthday if you see this. And if not, if you see it later, happy belated birthday. You know, we got a lot of years to make up for not celebrating birthdays, so the more wishes, the later after your birthday, the better. So, what will I talk about today? The last video I did, as you can imagine, was pretty intense. It actually took me a little bit of time to gather my thoughts and sit back down in front of the camera because that was the first big reveal when I talked about my past CSA experiences to anybody outside of my family and close friends. So it was, difficult and yet freeing at the same time. But I needed to take just a beat and before I came back in front of the camera. So here I am today. One of the things I wanted to share, we have a lot of experiences and people who've talked about, the Jehovah's Witness policies when it comes to health and how they've been harmed. The one that gets the most press, I guess, or there's the most conversation you hear is surrounding the blood issue. Jehovah's Witnesses do not accept blood transfusions. They do withhold them from their children as well. It's a very complicated reason as to why. They say it's because blood is extremely precious, very sacred, and that there's the direct command in Acts that states to not eat blood. And they say that if you put it in your veins, it's the same as consumption. And so many witnesses, including young children, have died because of this. Courts are starting to intervene a little bit more now, but again, it's that fine line between religious freedom as to what the courts can and cannot regulate. So there is a lot out there regarding that. But what I was going to talk about today is something that's just a little bit different in how it impacted my life. When I was 14, I had a brother right next to me in age. We were the two closest. He served as like a buffer my whole childhood between myself and the brother that was older than us. Again, the brother that was older than us is the one who was my abuser, but also the brother that was abusive was not just sexually abusive. He was kind of a tyrant. He had a really bad temper. And so when I was little, I just kind of always lived in a state of fear because he was just, a handful. And so my brother John served kind of as a buffer between us. Like, he would serve as a distraction and kind of make sure that I was protected as much as possible from the verbal stuff and the physical stuff. He didn't know anything else, of course, that had happened to me until I was an adult. But he and I were just exceptionally close. And so when I was 14, he was 18, and he was out of high school, out of trade school, and he ended up moving out to Colorado, which is where we had some other family, just because he wanted to kind of start over, start fresh. And I remember it was really hard for me because I was still at home with, at that time, the person who'd abused me when I was young was still living in the house. Again, this is 2 years before I, said anything about it. So I was there. So my abuser was still living in the house with myself, my mom, and a sister. So kind of my reprieve from all of that, John, he moved out to Colorado. So it was really, really difficult. But when he was out there, he met somebody and they got married. We went to the wedding, and I remember the wedding, and I cried through the whole thing because in my mind, her family was in Colorado, and so I just like knew he was like never gonna come back, and I would maybe see him a few times a year, and I was like just absolutely devastated. And I think the part of my mind that I tried to ignore all the abuse stuff from my childhood was coming out in that way, because there was that part of me that just like, if he wasn't there to protect me, like what was I gonna do? So it was just absolutely really awful. But then the next year, he asked his wife if she would be down to like relocate to Indiana, and she said sure. And so they moved back. He got a job here and they moved back, and that was just like super cool. And his wife was an absolute doll, and we were really close because she was only, I think, about 3 years older than, well, maybe 4 years older than me, but she had only had brothers. She didn't have any sisters, and so we hit it off and we palled around and did stuff together. She was diabetic and she was extremely frail, and she had to take I don't know like the volume of insulin. I just know that she was on 2 shots a day when they got married, and she was young. She was like 19 and very tiny. When I say tiny, she was like 5'1" and like 90, maybe like 91 pounds or something, just teeny thing. So they knew when they got married that she could not get pregnant, because if so, it would be like she wouldn't survive it. But something, as it does, happen, and she ended up getting pregnant. So the doctors immediately were like, you have to terminate your pregnancy. If you do not terminate this pregnancy, the child is going to not make it anyways, and also you will not make it. Like, there's 100% chance, there's no way. And because they were very loyal witnesses at that time, they, said, we don't have a choice. Like, we cannot terminate a pregnancy. And the elders would like go with them to talk to doctors. I just remember like my sister-in-law was constantly kind of being either in an elders meeting or being encouraged by the elders to stay firm and all this stuff, and that everyone was hoping for some miracle. And so as the pregnancy continued, her health continued to decline, and she spent most of her pregnancy in the hospital until, of course, the baby did end up dying despite all the medical things that they tried to do. I mean, she was taken such good care of by the medical staff, but there was no way that this was going to happen. And so the baby passed away, and then she ended up going into a coma and being on life support, and then she died. And they were young. Like, my brother was like 22, I think, and she was like 21. I was 18. And it was horrific. And my brother was a really tall, big guy. He was like 6'5" and really, really, really fit. He had a physical, labor-intensive job. And he was just this big, strapping, strong guy. And it just like absolutely devastated him. And everyone like was at the hospital to support, but it was like the inevitable thing. Everyone was just preparing that this was what was going to happen, because they had made the choice not to do anything about it early on. And so my brother ended up like just spiraling after that, and he got a little involved in like just a party lifestyle, not right away, but pretty soon thereafter. He was just completely lost, rather than the elders like trying to help him because he had gone through this tremendous like loss and pain, and it wasn't just the loss, it was like months and months and months of watching his wife and child slowly die. He they just disfellowshipped him. like strike one, he was out. And he was really kind of bitter about that, so he actually remarried really quickly to some person that he met, and it was like he was doing it, I think, to try to maybe get reinstated. But then he ended up being so turned off by everything, he just was like, forget it. Like, I don't. He would come to the memorial once in a while, but like beyond that, he didn't not want to make any effort to come back in. So, abortion is an absolute zero tolerance policy within the organization. And like a lot of evangelical or conservative Christians, they feel like you just pray really hard and some miracle will happen. And so really women don't have a choice. And, my sister-in-law had no choice. Like, even though they found out immediately pretty much that she was pregnant, like, it wasn't up to her ultimately. So if she had terminated her pregnancy, most likely she would have been fine, at least for quite some time, been able to live. But it wasn't, some people listen to this story and they go, oh, what an act of faith and courage and bravery. But it just like decimated families. Her family was absolutely destroyed, and because for their privacy, I won't go into that because that's not my story to tell, but it was exceptionally hard on her siblings. My brother, literally his health then took a giant toll. Not just because he was literally like heartbroken, but then he turned to, relieving that through drugs and alcohol for a time, not permanently, but for a time. And it impacted his health in a negative way and future relationships and all of my family. Like, we were heartbroken for her and her family, and of course for John. So the ripple effect of that zero tolerance policy was and is still devastating. So during this time, I'm 18 years old. I am still pioneering, but I'm also working a couple of part-time jobs, and I'm going to school for the travel industry, because back then, this was many moons ago when like travel agencies were everywhere and that's who you had to use for anything. And I loved to travel, and so it just kind of appealed to me. And my mom was kind of like all for it. She even said, she's like, work it out, so hopefully if you work in an office you can still pioneer with your schedule. But she actually wanted me to be successful in this and get somewhat of a career, even though I couldn't go to full-time college. Like, the compromise was I went to, basically it was like a trade school for that at the time. So I'm in this schooling, I'm almost finished, and I reconnect with an old family friend of ours who had been in my life and been friends with our family when I was young. He was older than me. He was like 9 years older than me, and he'd been around when I was like 11 or 12. So we reconnect. I'm all grown up. We start this long distance relationship. I'm laughing because it wasn't really that, like, it was very one-sided. Up to that point, I had not dated anybody. It wasn't allowed at all because I had to be 18 before I could, but also because I had older brothers and I was very much like an outdoorsy kind of tomboyish person. I had a lot of friends that were guys, and actually still are, but never like interested in dating me. And so nobody, even before it was known that Like, she's not old enough. Like, it just, nobody was ever interested in dating me, or never let me know that they were. I don't know. It was, so I'm 18 and I'm like, oh, this first guy who's like wants to talk to me and hold my hand when I see him, etc. Like, this is it. This is it. This is it. And so I kind of like threw everything in. I was in 110%, and first love, goo goo eye stuff, right? So I'm visiting one time there where he lives, and he's like, we should get married. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, just stay, because I was supposed to fly back home in another day or two. And he's like, just stay, don't go back, and we'll get married, and like, we'll start our life. And I was like, I can't. Like, I have to finish this, like, schooling. I want to start this a little bit, which is crazy because, like, for years I thought that was, like, my one big regret, that I didn't just stay and get married. But there was this part of my brain that was like, no, like, you have life to live. Like, don't do it. So I didn't. I came home. Long story short, we broke up. He married somebody else, like, a month and a half later. I found out. This whole thing is just wild. I was heartbroken. I was like absolutely devastated. It's your first like love. You think that's going to be like the one. And it wasn't at all. And so I have this whole thing is important because I had started then working full time in an office. And I get dumped. And so this is my first time like out in the real world. And my brother has just lost his wife, and he himself has just gotten disfellowshipped. So there's just this constant like chaos going on, right? Like, I'm heartbroken, grieving. All of a sudden I'm in an office full time with worldly people. And I start kind of like seeing what's out there. And so I had a coworker who was a couple years older than me, and she was like, we should go out sometime. And I was like, yeah, totally, go out sometime. I had no idea what she's talking about. Like, I didn't do anything ever. So we went somewhere. I wasn't even 21 back then. I looked like I was, so nobody carded me. And so that's when I started kind of like going out, like drinking, meeting people. And I just realized, like, this is, like, I just want to see what's out there. And so I did. And I started going out and meeting more people. And then I realized, like, I'm doing some stuff I could probably get in trouble for. So I moved out of my parents' house because I was like, as soon as it's now, I think it's what they call fading. But back then it was like, I knew as soon as they found out that I was kind of up to no good, that I say up to no good, I'm just like 20 years old by then and like going to parties and stuff. Like, I wasn't doing harm to anybody or doing anything that was like terribly illegal besides drinking underage, but nothing that, was like, I wasn't stealing or lying or hurting people. So I work with somebody who also is wanting to move out. So she and I get an apartment together, and I came home one day and I just like informed my mom, this is the deal. I'm moving, relocating. I'm going back to the city. And she was just like, well, are you also going to get disfellowshipped? And I was like, no. I'm not doing anything like that. And she totally didn't believe me, which is fine. And so I moved out. And then I'm living in an apartment, and there's a guy that I work with who's interested in me, but he's worldly. And so I was like, oh, I can't date you because, you're not a witness. Long story short, he started studying and he got baptized so that we could be together. And oh, I'm such a terrible person. We like as soon as he was baptized and we were like together, we broke up. Like I dumped him. But it was like I was overwhelmed and it was really really a crazy time. But as soon as we like broke up, he completely like he just left, started smoking again. Like he was entirely just doing it to try to get with me. So um all of that's happening. I'm still working, so I'm not pioneering anymore. I actually didn't even like tell anybody I stopped pioneering or I wasn't pioneering. I just stopped, but I didn't like write a letter about it. No, none of the elders met with me. And that's kind of because I talked about a little bit in the first video. Like, even though I was a huge overachiever, like being homeschooled and baptized at 11 and regular pioneering at 12, I never was really like you. So, like, I was never on assembly or convention parts. The only time I really was even on the platform at the hall was when I was like my assigned talks, which I always did really well with. But it was like they weren't very invested in me even when I was like the ultimate Jehovah's Witness. Like, they just weren't. So when I stopped pioneering, and all of a sudden my hours went from like 90 hours a month to like 4 month after month, nobody said anything. And so then I changed congregations, and like, I don't know, they didn't inform the elders that I had been a pioneer at the new hall, but no one ever said anything. I just kind of like stopped and like, okay. That was that. It was really, really kind of weird. So when I'm living in the city, I'm kind of off and on going to the meetings some, just because I still very mentally believed that it was the truth. And I was very invested in like wanting to make sure one day I was back doing everything full time. But I was also really, really guilt ridden because I knew I was doing some of this other stuff that I could get in trouble for. So I break up with this guy that I'm working with, and then he starts to hardcore stalk me and threaten me. And, you know, there were like restraining orders in place, lots of scary stuff that I'm not going to go into. So I ended up having to get a new job and move and get unlisted numbers, all that stuff. And one day I'm working full-time in the office. I'm working part-time in the mall at a at a music store. And I'm just like working away, and my mom shows up. I'm gonna go back. Sorry. So when I moved and broke up with my ex, kind of everything came to a head, because when he had his meeting with the elders, they wanted to know like all the things he'd done before he was disfellowshipped, and so he listed them. Of course, I was on the list of things he shouldn't have gotten involved in. And so I, at that time, was still kind of partying. I was kind of seeing a couple of different worldly guys. And so I just wrote a letter to the elders. And I was like, it wasn't like a disassociation letter. It was just like a confession letter. These are the things I've done. I'm really sorry. I don't know what to do. So they met with me, had my letter. So it was like I had to go back through it. It was just embarrassing. So I had to go back through all that. And then they I remember specifically they said, are you invested in relying on Jehovah for forgiveness and to not repeat this behavior? And I said, I don't know. I didn't say no, I didn't say yes, but it was like all of a sudden I was just like on the spot. And there's the part of my brain that was like, I'm actually having a really good time. I'm meeting people. I'm discovering who I am. I love my job, like all this stuff. And then the other part of me is like, you're going to die at Armageddon. So I was just like, I don't know. And so they were like, okay, well, then you're disfellowshipped. So I didn't want to be disfellowshipped, but I also couldn't lie and be like, yes, absolutely, and go live like this other double life. A big part of me had so much respect for the organization at that point, too. I didn't want to, and it was ingrained in you, I didn't want to bring reproach on Jehovah's name. I didn't want to be a bad example. And so I was like, okay, I took my punishment. So I had to tell my mom, who then reached out to my Pioneer School instructors from like 8 years before, and so they called me and were like, we're really sorry to hear this is the news that's going to come down, but, you're better than this. She had friends of mine calling me. Like, I don't understand, because the decision had already been made. It wasn't like, so it was just this bombarding of guilt tripping. So I'm disfellowshipped. I was kind of sad about it, but also I was only 20, and I was like, okay, now I might as well like do it up good, and just really like, I'm just gonna, go out every weekend and dance and drink and not really care. So I'm at work. I have not talked to my mom at that point in months. I'm at work. And my mom, on and off for years, had battled cancer. She had fought and battled cancer for probably 7 years. And so I'm at work in the evening at this part-time job. And in comes my mom with one of my sisters. And my mom is using a cane. And she was like, lost a bunch of weight. And she's like, I need to talk to you just for a minute. I hadn't talked to her in months because I'm disfellowshipped. So we go out into the food court at the mall, sit down at a table, and she informs me that she has been terminally ill for over a year, so before I was disfellowshipped. And she wanted to let me know before she died so that I wouldn't feel too bad when I found out after the fact. So, like, my sister-in-law and my nephew had just died like 2 years before. It hadn't been that long before that I had come clean with all the stuff about my childhood abuse. My brother is disfellowshipped, and he and I were in touch now that I was disfellowshipped. And then my mom's like, I'm going to be dead pretty soon. And I remember sitting and just being like I was in shock, but I was really upset. Like, I was really, really upset that my family had not like shared more of that up to that point. I am very grateful now that just before my mom passed away, the week before, I had a sister of mine reach out to me and tell me she's, she only has a few days left. And they did allow me and my brother to come back home and to be with them and with my mom when she passed away. I am pretty sure the reason for that is because my dad was disfellowshipped too. And my dad, of course, and my mom were still married. So I think that some of it was like, well, they didn't really have too much, but they let us be there and be involved and attend the funeral. It was really difficult. I was 21. My brother was now remarried, pretty stable. I mean, he was like done partying, like all that stuff. He and I had been, reconnected, so we were close again since we were both out. And so we were at least had each other during that time. We were with my family, but lots of judgmental looks and comments. And I remember standing at the funeral and having an elder, because, people would come that were witnesses, and they would give their condolences to my siblings, but they would just ignore my brother and my dad and I. There were a couple of people that didn't. There were a couple of people that were witnesses that did, give us their condolences. But for the most part, nobody did except non-witness family and acquaintances. And I remember more than one person, an elder, saying either to us or loud enough to make sure that we heard that it was really a shame that we were disfellowshipped and we need to hurry up and get back in because my mom would just be devastated to wake up at Armageddon and not have all of her kids there to greet her. Like, we were not already feeling like guilty and traumatized and full of turmoil as it was. But that was a nice, kind, loving reminder. And, I actually thought the same thing because this whole time I'm still very mentally in. I think like it's the truth. I go to memorials, I go to the conventions, so it was just extremely raw, difficult, unbelievable time. And on top of it, like my mom passed away in 1999, absolutely sure the Armageddon was coming because at that time it was in print in the Watchtower, and Steve Lett was our circuit overseer, and he said from the platform every chance he got that the world was going to end well before the year 2000. And my mom died in February of 1999. So she died completely, A, devastated that she didn't live long enough to see Armageddon because she'd been so faithful. And B, that John and I, my brother and I, were disfellowshipped and that we were not going to make it. And she was literally on her deathbed, barely able to speak and just using the words she could to beg us to hurry and get back, hurry and get back in. And when she passed away, she had handwritten us, each of her kids, a book, a diary. And mine that I have, I went through it once, right after, and read it. And I've only recently been able to reread it. And it's heartbreaking because the entire thing is pleading and begging for us to get back. And she's so terrified for, our future and that we're going to not make it. And she says she loves us in there, but it's not like a normal situation where a mom is terminal and she's giving her deepest thoughts about how proud she is of her children and happy memories. It literally is just page after page of this happened today and it made me think of you, and I just really hope that you figure it out and hurry up and get back because this world is ending any month now. And so when I had taken out my first loan on a vehicle, she had told me make your payments as best you can, but if you can't pay it off, it's okay because Armageddon's going to come before the loan is due in 5 years. It was just incredible. So she passed away in 1999, absolutely sure Armageddon was going to come, that it was there, and that we were going to die. That was her thought. She was going to wake up in the new world and be greeted by all of her children, including the two that had passed away already, and all the ones that were faithful, including my child molester of a brother because he was still a faithful witness. But John and I wouldn't make it, even though we were decent people. So there was a lot of guilt and shame and just I can't even really honestly capture in words, verbalize, that's why I'm writing a book, all the layers and layers of pain that brought for so long. And it brought with it so much guilt and fear that when my siblings would kind of confront me or encourage me to go to a memorial or whatever, I always just took it. And I never would say ever anything bad about the witnesses or the organization because I felt just guilt and shame. And so that lasted until very recently that I've been able to, work through that. So that was kind of that first time that I was out and disfellowshipped, and I was sowing my wild oats, I guess you could say, but at the same time, I had a lot of guilt and fear wrapped up in all of it too. And I had terrible Armageddon nightmares, and then a lot of resentment too, because I couldn't understand why my person who had abused me as a child had started a whole new life. He was married and having kids and like in good standing in his hall. And I just felt this very big conflict of emotions. And so it took a lot. It took a lot out of me, like emotionally and mentally. So I ended up getting reinstated when I was 26. That's a whole nother like video in and of itself that I'll talk about, but just I'll talk up to that point. During this time that I was like out and about and doing what I wanted, I had run into someone who had been really good friends with my family. He was actually best friends with my brother when we were young and teenagers, and we dated for a little bit, and then I was like, this is too weird because it feels like, I've known you since I was little, and I had a bad experience with the last guy I dated that I had known for my whole life, and so we broke up, didn't see each other, and then when I was like 25, I ran into him again, and we struck up our friendship, and he was disfellowshipped as well. So it was kind of nice because like I had a friend who knew me and who'd known my mom. That was a big thing, because whenever I would date people, it would be hard to like talk about my mom and explain to them who she was, the complications with it if they hadn't known her or been a witness. So here's this person who knew her like his whole life and knew all of us, and it just was very comforting. And so we would hang out as friends not all the time, but pretty regularly. And then we were walking. He was a bouncer at a nightclub that I was at. And so he would walk me to my car when I would go to leave on the weekend at night. And so he was walking me out, and he said, "Did you have fun?" And I said, "Yeah, we had a lot of fun." And he's like, "That's cool." He's like, I miss the kind of fun where we would just be sitting around your dining room table at the farmhouse playing cards with your family. And I remember like kind of chuckling about it and then getting in my car and like just breaking down, because this was somebody who knew that like intimately. Like he knew what it was like to sit around and have the fire going and music and people laughing and playing cards, and like how much fun and how warm my family was. But he understood the complications of, being disfellowshipped. And so I remember driving home, and I was just like kind of a basket case. And then he called me the next day and he said, "I'm sorry, like I didn't mean to upset you." And I was like, "No, it's fine." And so he came over and we started talking, and then we ended up starting dating again. And we dated for like a month, and we got married because his dad was sick with cancer, and he was kind of desperate to get back in, and he had been disfellowshipped once before, and to get back in the second time, I guess, is kind of difficult. So we got married. I was emotionally invested in our relationship. I would eventually find out he really wasn't at all, even though he said that he was, and really it was a vehicle for him to get reinstated, which we did when I was 26 or 27. I guess it was like 27. So I will leave that part, the rest of that for another video, because I'm going to talk about what it's like to be married to somebody who's a witness, an alcoholic, and an abuser, and a womanizer. How the elders deal with it, don't deal with it, and kind of then, what my escape plan was the second time around. But I would just want to talk about that chunk of my life because looking back on it as a young person, like the amount of stress that I ended up having and surviving and enduring in those formidable years, it's fascinating to me that it wasn't really talked about too much. And I just watched another video today about how sometimes witness feels like witnesses have like a complex where like they need the suffering, almost like it's some kind of weird complex where like if you're not suffering and there isn't bad stuff going on and happening to you, then it must mean that you're not really that faithful. So I think when as a witness during those years going through, like, it was just trauma after trauma after trauma after loss, between feeling like, oh, it's because we're so faithful, right? Like some of these things could have been avoided if we weren't just so faithful and God's people. But then the other part is you're so like focused on like Armageddon's coming, and especially in that era because it was the late 90s, mid late 90s, like we knew Armageddon was going to come at the end of 1999. That was just the way that it was. So you're so focused on that, you just don't pay attention to the pain and the heavy, heavy, awful things that are happening in your life. You just shove it down and shove it down to try to deal with it later. I told somebody, I said, it's like you see these true crime things where like a woman is stabbed like 45 times and she still manages to run 3 miles to get to a phone to get for help. And then the police and the ambulance come, and as soon as she gets in the ambulance, that's when she like collapses. And, they help to keep her alive at that point because your adrenaline is just going so hard and you're just focused on like survival. And it's the exact same thing emotionally when you are a witness. It's like this bad thing is happening. It's terrible. It's awful. But better's coming. Good is coming. Don't think about it. Just eyes on the prize, keep your eyes on the prize. And it's so unhealthy and so unnatural. And I remember starting to like go to therapy as well as to, read books and listen to podcasts and realizing like how much damage that alone did. It wasn't even like, shouldn't say it wasn't even, it on top of the actual trauma. Watching my young sister-in-law go from hilarious and happy and sweet to a vegetated state for months in a hospital until she finally died. Watching, my mom appear in front of me dying. My own mental, emotional, trying to deal with the fact that my abuser was able to move on and start a life while I was out left just flailing around. All of those things, I just shoved them down and ignored them. And I would talk about them somewhat, but not too much because it hurts so, so badly. And then when you start getting help and you realize, like, it's not normal and it's okay to be sad and it's okay for it to hurt and, to work through it. And it takes a lot of time. So I just want people to know, if you have gone through trauma, loss, like, get help and talk about it. It can't be ignored. You can ignore it for a certain amount of time, but it has to be dealt with. And even if you think like your circumstances are going to change at some point, things will get better. Even if they do get better, that trauma still happened and it still has to be dealt with. So, I was in a state for a while where I couldn't afford and I couldn't find a therapist. And I will tell you, there are fantastic podcasts out there that are therapy-based. So please find one that works for you if that's even where you have to start. I know that was probably a lot and kind of heavy too, but I will emphasize I'm very happy now. We'll talk about that journey to where I am now. I have a fantastic life. I am productive member of society, and I have this platform, I'm just going to reiterate, to share with people, especially women who are survivors of all kinds of traumas and abuses that um, getting out of that cult is one of the most freeing things that you can do, but there is so much life beyond it. There really, really is. And it's just out there waiting for you. And I don't care how old you are or how young you are or what your circumstances, don't feel like you're not worthy of getting the help and getting the attention and getting the relief that you deserve. So that's it for now. That's all I wanted to say today. I will be back in front of this hopefully a little sooner than I have been since the last one. And I'll have hopefully other news coming too about future endeavors. But until then, I hope you all take care. I hope you are living your best life. And I wish you all a happy, cult-free day.